Hey guys, welcome to Neighbor Stories with JusRead. Today we're diving into some incredible stories about overcoming the toughest neighbor disputes. Our story is entitled, Neighbor's House vs. 10,000 Toilet Paper Rolls. The story starts like this. I never thought I'd become the neighborhood vigilante, armed with toilet paper rolls and a grudge. But life has a funny way of pushing you to your limits, especially when dealing with neighbors like Karen Wilcox. My name's Mike, and I've lived on Maple Street for the better part of a decade. It's a quiet suburban area, the kind of place where kids ride their bikes on the sidewalk and families have barbecues in their backyards. At least it used to be. Everything changed when Karen moved in across the street about 2 years ago. At first, we all tried to be welcoming. My wife Sarah and I even brought over a homemade apple pie as a housewarming gift. Karen accepted it with a tight-lipped smile and a curt thank you, before practically slamming the door in our faces. Well, that was interesting, Sarah said, as we walked back to our house. I shrugged. Maybe she's just stressed from the move. I'm sure she'll warm up eventually. Boy, was I wrong? Over the next few months, Karen made it her personal mission to police the neighborhood. She'd call the cops for the most trivial reasons imaginable. Kids laughing too loudly while playing in their yards? That's a noise complaint. Someone's grass growing half an inch over the Homeowners Association mandated height? You bet she'd report it. But the final straw came when she called the police on my 12-year-old son, Tommy, and his friends. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in June. Tommy and a few of his buddies were playing basketball in our driveway. They were having a great time, trash-talking each other in that good-natured way kids do. I was in the garage, tinkering with my old Chevy, when I heard the unmistakable sound of a police siren. Confused, I stepped out to see a patrol car pulling up in front of our house. "What's going on, officer?" I asked, walking up to meet him as he got out of his car. The cop, a young guy who looked fresh out of the academy, seemed almost embarrassed. "We received a noise complaint, sir. Something about kids disturbing the peace?" I couldn't believe my ears. "Are you serious? They're just playing basketball." The officer glanced over at the group of bewildered kids, then back at me. "I can see that, sir. But we have to follow up on all calls. Mind if I talk to them for a minute?" I nodded, still in shock. As the officer went to speak with Tommy and his friends, I looked across the street. There was Karen, peeking out from behind her curtains with a smug look on her face. My blood boiled. This wasn't just about being a nosy neighbor anymore. She was actively trying to make our lives miserable. After the officer left, assuring me that no laws had been broken and the kids were fine, I called a neighborhood meeting. We gathered in my living room that evening, about 15 of us, representing most of the families on our street. "This has got to stop," I said, pacing in front of the fireplace. "Karen's behavior is getting out of hand. She's creating a hostile environment for all of us, especially our kids." Sarah nodded in agreement. Tommy was really shaken up by the police showing up. "He's afraid to play outside now." Our neighbor, Bob Johnson, a retired teacher, spoke up. "I've lived here for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this. We need to do something." But what? Asked Lisa Chen from down the street. "We've tried talking to her. We've tried being nice. Nothing works." That's when an idea started to form in my mind. It was crazy, probably a little childish, but at that point, I was desperate. "I have a plan," I said slowly, "but I'm going to need everyone's help. And a lot of toilet paper?" The room fell silent as I outlined my scheme. By the time I finished, there were mixed reactions, some shocked, some amused, and some downright enthusiastic. "Mike, are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "It seems a bit extreme." I took a deep breath. "I know it's out there, but hear me out. Karen needs to learn that her actions have consequences. More importantly, she needs to learn to lighten up and be part of this community. If this doesn't work, we'll try something else, but I think it's worth a shot." After some debate and a few modifications to the plan, everyone agreed to pitch in. Operation TP was a go. Over the next week, we quietly stockpiled toilet paper. Everyone bought a few extra packs with their groceries, careful not to arouse suspicion. We ended up with well over 10,000 rolls, stored in various garages and basements across the neighborhood. The night before our plan was set to unfold, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, wondering if I was making a huge mistake. What if this backfired spectacularly? What if Karen called the cops again, and this time I was the one in trouble? Sarah must have sensed my unease because she rolled over and put a hand on my arm. "Mike, you okay?" I sighed. "Just nervous about tomorrow. Maybe this is a bad idea." She was quiet for a moment before speaking. "You know, when we first moved here, I was worried it wouldn't feel like home. But it does, because of neighbors like Bob and Lisa, and all the others who've become our friends. Karen's threatening that. If this plan of yours can help her see what she's missing out on, then I think it's worth trying." Her words calmed me, and I finally drifted off to sleep. The next morning, we put our plan into action. It was a Saturday, and Karen always left at 7 a.m. sharp for her yoga class. As soon as her car turned the corner, we sprang into action. Teams of neighbors descended on Karen's house, armed with toilet paper rolls and determination. We worked quickly and efficiently, draping streams of white across her lawn, wrapping it around trees and bushes, and festooning her porch railings. The kids, excited to be part of the action, took charge of the lower levels while adults handled the higher reaches. Tommy, perched on Bob's shoulders, managed to get a particularly impressive streamer caught on the weather vane. By the time we finished, Karen's house looked like it had been caught in a snowstorm of Charmin. Every surface was covered in a thick layer of toilet paper. It was a masterpiece of petty revenge. As we stood back to admire our handiwork, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. Maybe we went too far, I muttered. Lisa, overhearing me, shook her head. No way, Mike. This is exactly what she needs. A wake-up call. We barely had time to disperse before Karen's car appeared at the end of the street. As she turned into her driveway, we all watched from various hiding spots, waiting for the reaction. Karen's car screeched to a halt. For a long moment she just sat there, staring at her transformed house with her mouth hanging open. Then she exploded out of the car. What is the meaning of this? She shrieked, her face turning an alarming shade of red. Who did this? I'll sue. I'll call the police. That was my cue. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out from behind a tree and walked towards her, my hands raised in a placating gesture. Karen, I called out, before you do anything, I have a proposition for you. She whirled to face me, her eyes blazing with fury. Did you do this? I'll have you arrested for vandalism. I kept my voice calm. Karen, please, just hear me out. Yes, I organized this, but I'm willing to make you an offer. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. What kind of offer? A challenge, I said. If you can remove all of this toilet paper within 24 hours, I'll donate $100,000 to a charity of your choice. Karen's jaw dropped. What? Are you serious? I nodded solemnly. Completely serious? But there's a catch. You have to do it alone without hiring help. And if you succeed, you also have to agree to stop calling the police for minor issues and try to be a more understanding neighbor. For a moment, Karen just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, she burst out laughing. It wasn't a pleasant laugh, more of a harsh, bitter sound. You think you're so clever, don't you? She spat. Fine. I'll do it. And when I'm done, I'll use that money to make sure you never pull a stunt like this again. With that, she stormed into her house, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a moment, wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Bob? Well, he said with a wry smile, I guess now we wait. The next 24 hours were some of the most tense and surreal of my life. Karen emerged from her house about an hour later, armed with garbage bags and a determined glare. She set to work, tearing down streams of toilet paper with a vengeance. The neighborhood watched in shifts, always keeping an eye on Karen's progress. As the hours ticked by, it became clear that the task was more challenging than any of us had anticipated. By nightfall, Karen was still going strong, but she'd only managed to clear about a third of the toilet paper. Her perfectly coiffed hair was in disarray, and her designer workout clothes were smeared with dirt and grass stains. As I watched her from my living room window, Sarah came up beside me. Do you think she'll make it? She asked. I shook my head. Honestly, I don't know, but I'm starting to think that maybe wasn't the point. The night wore on, and Karen kept working. Around 2 a.m. I woke up to the sound of frustrated screaming. Peering out the window, I saw Karen having a meltdown in her front yard, kicking at a pile of toilet paper. For a moment, I considered going out there, but what would I say? This whole situation was my fault after all. In the end, I just went back to bed, feeling a mix of guilt and anticipation for what the morning would bring. Dawn broke, and with it came the final hours of Karen's challenge. The entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath as we watched her frantic efforts. She was moving slower now, clearly exhausted, but still determinedly stuffing toilet paper into overflowing garbage bags. As the 24-hour mark approached, it became clear that Karen wasn't going to make it. There was still a significant amount of toilet paper clinging to her trees and bushes, not to mention the bits stuck in hard to reach places like her gutters and roof. At exactly 7 a.m., I walked across the street, my heart pounding. Karen was on her knees in the middle of her lawn, surrounded by bags of toilet paper. She looked up as I approached, her face a mask of exhaustion and defeat. Time's up, Karen, I said softly. For a long moment, she just stared at me. Then, to my utter shock, she started to cry. Not knowing what else to do, I knelt down beside her. Hey, it's okay. You did your best. Why? She sobbed. Why would you do this to me? I took a deep breath. Because we wanted you to understand how it feels when someone disrupts your life for no good reason. Every time you called the police on kids playing or reported neighbors for minor infractions, you were doing to us what we did to you with this toilet paper. Karen wiped her eyes, smearing mascara across her cheeks. I was just trying to maintain standards in the neighborhood. Is that so wrong? There's nothing wrong with wanting a nice neighborhood, I said. But there's a difference between maintaining standards and making everyone miserable. You've been so focused on rules and regulations that you've forgotten about the people who live here. She was quiet for a moment, looking around at the mess of toilet paper. I suppose I have been a bit overzealous? A bit? I couldn't help but chuckle. Karen, you called the police on children playing basketball. To my surprise, she let out a watery laugh. When you put it like that, it does sound rather ridiculous, doesn't it? I stood up and offered her my hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, and I helped her to her feet. Listen, I said, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but it's not too late to start over. What do you say we clean this mess up together, and then maybe you could join us for a barbecue this weekend? Get to know your neighbors as people, not just rule breakers." Karen looked around at the toilet paper-strewn yard, then back at me. Slowly, a small smile spread across her face. "I'd like that," she said softly. As if on cue, our other neighbors began emerging from their houses. They came with rakes, garbage bags, and helping hands. Together, we all set to work cleaning up the toilet paper. As we worked, conversation flowed freely. Karen, to everyone's surprise, turned out to have a dry sense of humor once she let her guard down. She regaled us with stories of her past as a corporate lawyer, which explained a lot about her initial approach to neighborhood disputes. By midday, the yard was clean, and we were all gathered on Karen's porch, drinking lemonade and laughing about the absurdity of the whole situation. "I can't believe I spent all night fighting with toilet paper," Karen said, shaking her head. "I haven't pulled an all-nighter like that since law school." Bob raised his glass in a toast to new beginnings and neighborly understanding. We all clinked glasses, even Karen joining in with a genuine smile. As the impromptu gathering wound down, I pulled Karen aside. "About that charity donation," I began. She held up a hand to stop me. "You know what? Keep your money. Instead, why don't we use it to start a neighborhood improvement fund? We could fix up the park, maybe organize some community events." I grinned. "That's a great idea, Karen. Welcome to the neighborhood for real this time." From that day on, things changed on Maple Street. Karen still had her moments of being overly concerned with rules, but she learned to approach issues with communication rather than confrontation. She even joined the Neighborhood Watch, channeling her observant nature into something positive. As for me, well, I learned that sometimes the craziest plans can lead to the best outcomes. And I now have a lifetime supply of toilet paper stored in my garage. You never know when it might come in handy for future neighborhood diplomacy. Looking back, I realized that what started as a ridiculous prank ended up bringing our community closer together. It taught us all a valuable lesson about empathy, understanding, and the importance of not taking ourselves too seriously. So if you ever find yourself at odds with a neighbor, remember, sometimes all it takes is 10,000 rolls of toilet paper and a willingness to see things from a different perspective to turn an enemy into a friend. Just make sure you're prepared for one heck of a cleanup afterwards. Update. It's been about a year since the great toilet paper incident, and I'm happy to report that life on Maple Street has taken a turn for the better. Karen's transformation wasn't instantaneous, but the change in her attitude has been remarkable. The neighborhood improvement fund we set up with the money I'd originally offered as a challenge prize has been put to good use. We've renovated the local park, adding new playground equipment and a small community garden. Karen, surprisingly, took charge of the garden project. She's got quite the green thumb, as it turns out. One sunny Saturday morning, I was out front mowing my lawn when Karen walked over, carrying a basket of tomatoes. "Morning, Mike," she called out. "Fresh from the garden. Thought you and Sarah might like some." I switched off the mower and wiped my brow. "Thanks, Karen. They look great." She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." "Oh?" I raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" Karen nodded. "Yes, everything's fine. It's just, well, I've been thinking about what happened last year, with the toilet paper and all that." I chuckled. "Hard to forget." "Indeed," she said with a wry smile. "Anyway, I wanted to apologize properly. My behavior before that was, well, it was unacceptable. I was so caught up in trying to control everything around me that I forgot how to be a good neighbor." I was taken aback by her candor. "I appreciate that, Karen." Really? And for what it's worth, I'm sorry too. The toilet paper thing was pretty extreme." She laughed. "Oh, it was. But I needed that wake-up call, and I'm grateful for it. Believe it or not." We chatted for a while longer, and as Karen was leaving, she turned back. "Oh, by the way, the Homeowners Association is having a meeting next week. I was thinking of proposing some changes to make the rules a bit more flexible. Would you be interested in helping me draft the proposal?" I grinned. "I'd be honored." The Homeowners Association meeting turned out to be a turning point for our community. Karen and I presented our proposal for revising some of the more stringent rules. We suggested allowing a bit more leeway on lawn maintenance during dry spells, proposed designated hours for kids to play outside without noise complaints, and recommended a more collaborative approach to addressing neighborhood issues. To my surprise, most of the residents were receptive to the changes. There were a few holdouts, like old Mr. Peterson, who grumbled about maintaining standards, but overall, the mood was positive. After the meeting, Bob clapped me on the back. "Never thought I'd see the day when you and Karen would be on the same side of a homeowners association debate," he chuckled. I shrugged. People can surprise you, I guess. As the seasons changed, so did our neighborhood. The new, more relaxed atmosphere led to more community events. We had block parties, holiday celebrations, and even a neighborhood talent show. Karen's stand-up comedy routine about her former self was surprisingly hilarious. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. About 6 months after the toilet paper incident, we had a bit of a legal scare. I was served with papers one morning, a lawsuit from the company that managed our waste disposal. Apparently, the massive amount of toilet paper we'd used in our prank had caused some issues at the local processing plant. I was panicking, imagining hefty fines or worse. But to my amazement, Karen stepped up. She called a neighborhood meeting at her house that evening. "Listen up, everyone," she said, standing in her living room. "As a former corporate lawyer, I can handle this, but I need to know every detail of what happened that day." We spent hours going over the events, with Karen taking meticulous notes. By the end of the night, she had a strategy. "Okay," she said, "here's the plan. First, we're going to argue that the amount of toilet paper, while admittedly large, shouldn't have caused significant issues if their systems were properly maintained. Second, we'll offer to organize a community service day at the processing plant to make up for any inconvenience. And third," she paused, a mischievous glint in her eye, "we're going to countersue for emotional distress caused by their frivolous lawsuit." I was skeptical. "Can we really do that?" Karen grinned. "Probably not, but it'll make them think twice about pursuing this. Trust me, I've dealt with cases like this before. They're just trying to scare us into a quick settlement." True to her word, Karen handled everything. She drafted responses, made phone calls, and even accompanied me to a meeting with the company's lawyers. Watching her in action was impressive. She was like a force of nature, dismantling their arguments with precision and proposing solutions that left them stammering. In the end, we settled out of court. The company agreed to drop the lawsuit in exchange for our community service day and a modest donation to an environmental charity. It was a far cry from the huge sum they'd initially demanded. As we left the final meeting, Karen turned to me. "You know, I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed this part of law, using legal knowledge to help people, not just to make money." I raised an eyebrow. "Thinking of getting back into practice?" She shook her head. "Not full-time? But I'm considering offering pro bono services to the neighborhood. Help people with minor legal issues, that sort of thing." And that's exactly what she did. Karen set up a small office in her spare room, offering free legal advice to our neighbors. It was her way of giving back, she said, for all the trouble she'd caused before. As for me, well, I learned a valuable lesson about judging people too quickly. Karen, who I'd once seen as the neighborhood villain, had become one of our community's strongest assets. Last week we had our annual block party. As I stood by the grill, flipping burgers, I couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. Kids were playing freely in the street, their laughter ringing out without fear of noise complaints. Neighbors chatted animatedly, sharing stories and plans for future projects. Karen sidled up to me, a plate in hand. "Burger for the chef?" I grinned, placing a patty on her bun. "Thanks. Enjoying the party?" She nodded, looking out over the scene. "You know, a year ago, I would have hated all this. The noise, the mess. I would have been inside, probably on the phone with the police." "And now?" I asked. Karen smiled. "Now, I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. This is what a neighborhood should be." As if on cue, Tommy ran up, breathless with excitement. "Dad? Karen, we're starting a water balloon fight in the park. Want to join?" I looked at Karen, expecting her to decline. Instead, she grinned. "Last one, there's a rotten egg," she yelled, taking off towards the park. I laughed, abandoning the grill to chase after them. As I ran, I thought about how sometimes, the most unexpected events can lead to the best changes in our lives. Our neighborhood isn't perfect. We still have our disagreements and challenges. But now, instead of calling the police or filing complaints, we talk to each other. We work things out. We remember that behind every fence and front door, there's a person just trying to live their best life. And if things ever get too tense, well, I've still got a few rolls of toilet paper in my garage, just in case we need another community building exercise. But somehow, I don't think we will, because the real magic wasn't in the toilet paper or the challenge. It was in the way it brought us all together, reminding us of the power of understanding, forgiveness, and a good sense of humor. As I joined the water balloon fight, dodging and laughing with my neighbors, I realized that this joyful chaos, this sense of community, this was home. And it took 10,000 rolls of toilet paper to help us all see it. And guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. If you enjoyed this epic neighbor showdown, please smash that like button, comment with some house emojis to show your support, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks a lot, and I will see you again tomorrow with another amazing story.